I'm about to give up on my flowers and just let them.
Yeah. Mine are doing all right, but
I told Ressa that she could water them. She won't remember.
she won't remember.
Huh.
Well, most of my stuff, I kind of finagled it where the sprinkler would hit it, and I've got that coming on every other day.
I did hint to Mike that we might need to turn the sprinkler on, and he said it was dead. And I said, "You mean it just doesn't work?" And he said, "No, it just doesn't always sprinkle where it's supposed to." I was like, whatever, but maybe sprinkling somewhere might help. What time? It's almost 1 o'clock.
Yeah, a couple more minutes.
Maybe nobody wants to hear us.
True. They're avoiding us.
I know. I'm looking at participants. Oh, Leah just said a lot of people have not logged back in. I guess we can give them about 5 minutes.
Yeah, just watch it.
Yeah, she had 18 this morning. We're up to 12. They're coming back slowly.
We're still eating. What are you talking about?
Are you? I was getting ready to say, are you Peyton Cook? Is that you?
Oh man, let me change it. My daughter uses, she has interviews for the School of the Arts, and so she's been logging on to an advisor, so she changed me. Yeah.
Okay. I was just like, who is Peyton Cook? They weren't there this morning. And as soon as you said something, I was like, oh, that's Jennifer.
It's funny, you can really be anybody you want to. So like I could make my name be like Angelina Jolie if I wanted to. Look, watch. I just changed.
How'd
you
do that?
In case anybody's like, oh my gosh, Brad Pitt's on here. I mean, this is funny.
We're a sick bunch. Had you been on here earlier, you'd have heard Joan and I talking about the olden days in Richland too.
The little things that make us happy, you know, like.
No.
I am muting myself because I'm eating an orange and I'll probably be loud.
All right.
For those of you on here, we're going to wait a few minutes and see if we can gather some folks back. A few people missing. And while we're waiting, Joan, how did we take pictures up in the mountains? That had been 14 years ago because I've been in Florence 13 or 14. So that's
yeah, Cindy. I mean, I can't imagine we didn't have the technology.
I don't either.
I don't know. Like I said, maybe lack of technology played in our favor that time.
I've probably changed phones 500 times and lost them.
Oh yeah. Yes, I do remember those days. All right. Somebody's asking, I want to hear you. So can somebody not hear us?
Okay. Shoot.
I think she was just responding to earlier when Cindy was joking that maybe nobody wanted to hear her, and that's why.
Oh, gotcha. Yay, we have a friend.
So we got a little punchy.
Oh, you wait until we're 2 hours into this if you want to know punchy. That was when we recorded last week. It
Yeah, we did get a little punchy.
we got a little punchy after two
Hey,
hours.
we don't have any delete for the live session. We can we edited out for that one. This
I
one's for
know.
us people.
I know.
Great. That was
I
Jennifer.
forgot to
Numbers if we get
tell Mike.
wacky.
I forgot to tell Mike that he needed to invent a mute button.
That's right. That's right. I need a blooper button for Cindy.
Huh. Well, we were part way into the taping and my computer started
Cindy.
from the thunder and lightning outside. I'm like, that's great. So
I laugh every time Cindy texts me about the taping because I haven't videotaped anything in at least 20 years.
Hmm.
I'm like, oh, okay, because we're not actually taping or recording. It's like you're just, I don't even know what it's called now. You know what I mean? Like you used to have to do all this stuff with the movie
Yeah.
camera. And now it's like you're just screen recording. So it's hard to
Right.
even explain it.
yeah. Well, we've got 19 folks.
Yeah, so we're up to 19.
So, and it's 1 o'clock. So let's go ahead and get started. Let me, hopefully everybody can see the screen. And Jennifer, somebody's monitoring chat for us.
Yes.
Okay. So the session this afternoon from 1 to 4 is putting the meaning in meaningful IEPs. And Joan and I will be walking through the PowerPoint slides. As Jennifer shared this morning, I believe that guided notes and everything is in one document for you to use. And I'm going to be advancing the slides if I can find my arrow there. Okay. We're going to introduce ourselves. And for those of you that don't know me, I'm Dr. Cindy Nixon. I'm a professor at Francis Marion in the School of Ed. And I run the graduate program for the School of Education. And I also am a task consultant along with Jennifer and Joy and Leah and Mike. And Joan?
Yes.
I can introduce you if you want me to, but I'm not.
Oh, that's right. Hey, I'm Joan Jacoby. I'm with Richland School District 2. I'm a special ed coordinator there. And I have worked for a while now with our transition teams. And, you know, when Cindy was back in the olden days, that's our new term. Cindy and I refer to the olden days. You know, Cindy was kind of the leader in setting up transition programs in our district at the time. And we were fortunate to be able to hire people as transition coordinators. And since then, we've managed to keep these people, which is good because I know a lot of districts have lost theirs, but we still have a transition team. I've got 5 transition coordinators or transition specialists. And we have one assigned to each high school, but we're also working with a lot of worksite-based programs. We have some initiatives going on with Midlands Tech, Project Search. We've kind of created our own version of Project Search, and we call it Discover Academy. So I've still kept my foot in transition a pretty good bit. And with Cindy and Joy and Jennifer and all asked me to present with them to kind of bridge and include the more practical parts of dealing with transition in IEPs and in the schools. So, you know, I want you to know that, you know, all of y'all are wonderful transition people. What I'm presenting is what has worked for me. It's certainly not intended to trump anything that you're doing. It's just a resource, and hopefully we'll have enough interaction and input from you all that, you know, we may come up with other things. So kind of what we're presenting is some of the training that I do in Richland too, and it's helpful. So I hope it's helpful to you all as well.
The purpose of today's training is really to help you put together training so that you can go back into your districts and train your teachers on taking transition assessment and using that data to then move into writing transition-rich IEPs that are based on age-appropriate transition data. The target audience today is those of you that will be training. The target audience tomorrow is going to be for teachers, those frontline folks that are actually working in the classroom. So you'll be able to take this PowerPoint and adjust it however you are is needed as we go through here. Please note that if you have questions, speak up. We can unmute you. It would be good to stay muted unless you need to share a question or have a question. As Joan said, this is how it's done in Richland too. And hopefully you will have 2 or 3 IEPs with you. As we give examples, we would love for you to talk about what's on your IEPs or any issues that you're having so that we can kind of talk through it and help you when you go back to train your teachers. So Joan?
All right. Well, the first part of the training is, and I hope you don't feel this is elementary, but what we've found is, you know, in the past, people treat transitions separately, like it's something different than what we've been doing with students all along. So when I talk to people, I start with reviewing IEP requirements because they're the same for transition, and I don't want people to lose sight of that. Excuse me. And with Enrich now, of course, you know, they've kind of tailored IEPs to kind of fit the particular stage of life that the student is in. And, you know, I try to help people understand, yes, they're slightly different, but they're still the same. So we're going to start out this training kind of reviewing IEPs, and I'm going to show you a strategy that I kind of use to help people write compliant and meaningful IEPs. So this first part that's more general IEP information, you know, give us some feedback. You know, if we need to move faster through it, we can. Or if you have suggestions, like Cindy said, raise your hand or break in and get our attention. So anyway, this is what Enrich offers, you know, our early childhood, school age, and then the transition IEPs. For you all, this is just a little nugget of information. If you weren't able to listen to the State Department training the other day, they're going to change the first 2 IEPs a little bit. Not that it really hits transition, but that's just an FYI nugget. School age is now going to be 5 through 12, and early childhood will be only 3s and 4s. Doesn't have transition age for us in South Carolina. That still starts at 13. So just FYI of a little Enrich news that might be coming your way. Okay, Cindy, let's go on to the next one. When I talk to people, I really talk about what makes an effective IEP. And over the years, sometimes I've started with, okay, this is the way to make people understand. And, you know, then I moved to something else because maybe the problems changed. So I kind of had to, you know, change our thinking about it. Well, I came up with another thing, mainly from getting feedback from audits. Our last big State Department audit, and then just individual things that we've had come back to us that were pointed out to us. And I think that we've decided now the big key to an effective IEP is alignment. Working with people to align an IEP has kind of really opened up some eyes, explaining it this way. That if your IEP aligns, you're probably going to make that just inherently a very much more compliant IEP, plus it's going to be more meaningful. So a well well-aligned IEP results in an end product, a great, beautiful end product. A misaligned IEP is just going to be a scattered mess on the floor. So people seem to understand that analogy. So that's kind of the one we went with through this this training. Go ahead, Cindy. Cindy's asleep on the advance button over there. Cindy.
No.
Cindy? Well, and also during this training, I'm making a lot of references and I framed it to how Enrich presents this information. So that's why I kind of start at the beginning and how you do alignment. But of course, all the IEPs, regardless of the kind it is, starts with the consideration of special factors. And these are the things over and above your typical strengths, needs portion of the IEP that targets behavior, vision, communication, and assistive technology. And what do I explain to people is this is your first block of your alignment. Okay, this is the first block of your foundation, and this is where alignment starts. Cindy? There we go. Alignment starts here. You identify the special factors, and this is the first block. From this point forward, this is where your alignment starts. I should be able to track anything that is pointed out as an area of need in special factors. I should be able to follow that all the way to the end of the IEP. See how it's addressed. Now, anything pointed out as a need, it may be addressed in many different ways, but the point is it is addressed. So alignment starts here with your consideration of special factors. So how well aligned are your IEPs? What do y'all think? Do you all see alignment issues? You may not call them that, but is that something that you all see in your IEPs?
Comments?
Comments? Nobody's commenting. Or
Okay.
muted you all, who knows?
I think, I'm sorry.
Nobody's
But,
chatting.
yeah, if you want to.
Or Cindy and I are.
Okay,
presenting to you.
I'll talk. This is Ann.
Thank you, Ann. Yeah, there you go.
Okay, I thought they were aligned until I checked about 18 last week,
Mhm.
and they are not.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you.
And I'll tell you, an exercise that I do through some of the training is I'll have teachers have an IEP, but I have them start at the back of the IEP, at the end of the IEP, and say, okay, you know, your LRE, work your way back to the front. Do you have evidence all the way back through to the beginning that supports the end? You know, when we get to accommodations, okay, look at your accommodations. Now back yourself up. If you can't follow the track of how something got on an IEP, then you've lost your alignment. Go ahead, Cindy, we'll move on.
Yep.
All right, so we, of course, special factors lead into your present levels of performance. I can't say PLAF, it just makes me feel funny to say it. So when I talk about present levels, I'm just calling them present levels, but I am talking about academic and functional performance. And this is where, again, your first step of alignment. If you check several things if you check behavior and special factors, then I need to see that talked about in the present levels. Of course, these are the regulations. Excuse me, y'all. I'll try not to lose my voice during this. This is the legal part of it. We just put that in there for y'all's benefit, but I think y'all probably know this quite well. When we talk about the narrative, I think we kind of missed a slide there, Cindy. Did we miss a slide? Okay. All right, the narrative section of the IEP is based on 4 areas of information. And of course, all of this is based on your assessment. It's information that you've received through functional, academic, transition, assessment, all of that goes in there. The 4 areas that we cover and enrich are, there we go. Of course, the strengths, academic and functional, needs, academic, functional, including your special factors that were identified, and then how the student's disability affects involvement. We call this the impact statement. And then, of course, the parent and student input. This is a big thing that we emphasize with teachers, is to make sure what they put in the IEP is data driven. And we don't just have what we think or what we talked about or what somebody told me, that it's factual, it's specific, it's reflective of the data. And one thing I had to work with teachers, oddly, work with teachers a lot with, is that their present levels are inclusive of all the factors that are affecting educational progress. You know, not just, oh, I'm a teacher who teaches students with learning disabilities, therefore my IEP is only going to reference problems with reading and math or writing, okay? You know, if the child has behavioral needs, the child has other functional issues, all of that has to be inclusive. So we can't have blinders on and just focus on one area of an issue. You know, one example that I've shared before is I worked with a speech person, and the student was, you know, what we typically call quote unquote speech only child. And he was quite a handful. And he had a lot of behavioral issues going on and was getting suspended and recommended for expulsion. And the school told the SLP, you know, we need to look at developing a fib and a bip. Well, I thought I was going to have to scrape her off of Mars. She was like, no, I don't do that. I'm only speech. You know, he's only a speech only child. So sometimes, you know, I think when people get it and then I get slapped in the face with something like that, and I'm like, oh, wait a minute, they don't get it. So I do like to remind people that, hey, we have to look at the big picture of the child, not just a narrow focused, because that's what I teach.
I think too, here, I think for the most part was with Jennifer this morning, and she talked a lot about assessment data. And when this slide says reflective of data, I think it's training your teachers to highlight that, because sometimes they just put stuff in there. And if you've got a child that has got behavior issues, for example, or is having difficulty on a job site because of behavior issues, somewhere in present levels and in the assessment, all of that needs to be noted. I know when I was a director, you know, somebody would, you know, a child would act up, or they were getting ready to be suspended, you know, for X amount of days and about to go beyond their 10 days or whatever. And you go back and look, and there was absolutely nothing in present levels. According to what was written, the child was a perfect individual. So, but I think Jennifer did a really good job this morning of making you aware so that you can give that information to your teachers, that they've got to have solid assessment data to put together the transition IEP.
Yep. All right, and this is, again, this was just something that seemed to resonate with teachers. And when we explained it this way, they were like, oh, yeah, I get it now. But we talk about the narrative being the big picture, okay? And of course, what Cindy just said, it's based on your assessments, it's based on your data collection. It's very factual. From this, the IEP determines the focus of the IEP, which turns out to be your findings. So, you know, we envision a funnel. The whole child goes into the funnel, but what comes out of the funnel is the narrowing of the big picture, and it points to the specific skills which lead to goal development and the determination of your services. Now, when we do this too, again, you don't do this for, you know, reading, writing, math, and behavior, and leave transition only for the transition section of the IEP. When the child is of transition age, transition information needs to be treated exactly the same as your other sources of findings. So making sure that that is inclusive and comes out the same. It's not different. It's treated the same. These are just some strength set statements. These were some things that I just shared with teachers, and we have strength and weaknesses type things. And these are just snippet things. They're certainly not indicative of the whole section. And there are a lot of samples in here. You can use them. You probably have very good samples of your own, but these are things that we just shared in here for you to use, not use, but see. But the point of all of this is to show teachers that this isn't a subjective, Cindy's a sweet girl, she has a lot of friends, that type of thing. And I'm not saying you can't say those things, but it can't be the only thing you have in your present levels. You have to have content. You have to have data content. And again, this should, you know, be inclusive of everything. So here are just some samples. We kind of used Diana. She's a 10th grade student. Just kind of gives a picture of her. So I won't read them to you, but you can kind of see what we're going with there.
Yeah, I was going to say at one point, I think Joan and I used to have a slide of a crowd of people, probably not appropriate in today's world because they wouldn't be saying.
Different. Have a mask on.
The point of it was, and I oftentimes, when I'm working with the grad students through the CREATE program that are becoming teachers, I'll say to them, you really need to write this. So if for some reason you happen to win the lottery and you've moved away and you're living on a, you know, 100-foot yacht, that somebody can walk into your classroom and they can pick up present levels and PLAFs, which we used to call plots, I think. Anyway, you can pick that up and really get a good idea of what that student, where they are, and what are their strengths and what are their weaknesses. It was just like a long time ago, people would put test scores in there. You know, Cindy's at the 150 map, has a 150 map score. Well, that doesn't mean anything to me. Or I'm at a 4th grade reading level or a 8th grade reading level. That still doesn't mean anything to me. Are we talking word recognition, decoding, comprehension, fluency, you know, those types of things.
Yeah, and you know, with the mention of test scores too, yeah, well, I remember that phase. And you know, when we said, oh, your IEPs have to be data driven, then all of a sudden, you know, we've got map scores, star results, you know, different things like that, which again are fine to put them in there, but it's how you use them. You know, are you using it as a comparison to explain where the student with the disability is performing in relation to students without disabilities? I mean, it can be used for that, but it can't just be thrown in there and not explained. So, you know, I'm okay with seeing test scores in there as long as they're an explanation of this is what this means. So in isolation, no. Integrated and explained, yes.
So as you're training your teachers, I think it's important to make them understand, okay, I have a map score of 150, but what does this look like in the classroom? How does it translate into being able to work independently and all of these different things, and getting teachers to understand, yes, you can do the test scores, but I need to know what this looks like in your classroom.
Yeah. All right, so just some more examples, and then of course we do some non-examples, and some of these I honestly did, pull off an IEP, but of course I changed the name. But I mean, yes, it's information, but does it help you understand the child? Does it help you know where you're going? Does it help you explain what the child needs from us? And typically not. So there are just some non-examples you can share if you'd like.
Yeah, new teachers coming in to a classroom moved, and they pull this up. It's like, okay, Betty looks like she's successful and must be doing okay in the gen ed curriculum, gets along with people, does better than reading and math, but it really doesn't tell me as a teacher at the very beginning of school what I need to do. And I think Jennifer talked this morning, and there was some discussion about, our virtual world that we live in now, and that many of you are going back into situations where you're not going to be face-to-face 5 days a week. I'll be surprised if that happens, but you are going to be you may be doing face-to-face, but you also may be doing a significant amount of virtual work. And looking at this, there's no way I could take Crocker and Betty and come up with what I needed to do virtually for them. So I think you've got to keep that in the back of our minds too.
Yeah. And just, we're getting a little off track here,
Yeah.
but about the virtual part, there are teachers need to understand that transition can take place virtually. There are still things to do. You can't just say, oh, we can't do that. I think there are things that can be done. I know when we ended school in March that our transition team, they put together a Google Classroom. And in that Google Classroom were, assessments, videos, activities. That was a good time to work on resume writing because it was something the kids could do and, could be sent back and monitored. And there was even kind of like one of the transition people posted, like every day, there was a transition activity. So when the kids logged in, then there was an activity there set up, ready to do. So like Cindy said, if we do all start back virtually, don't forget transition activities can continue. So good point, Cindy. All right, we'll get back on track. Okay, so we're looking at needs. We looked at strengths. Again, we're on Diana, and now we have taken the big picture of Diana. We've thrown Diana in the funnel, and we are coming out the other side. And what we're coming out the side with are things that we're going to take into our findings. That's going to help with the IEP, with the goals development and the service development. So we're getting some more specific information in here, where she is floundering, which, fluency strategy she has difficulty with, even though she's a 10th grader. Her independent reading level is way below grade level, and that's going to be an big impact, and it gets a little more specific. So again, just an example of a statement that we would like to see in the needs statement because it gives us some data to work with.
One of the things I am going to add, the last two sentences about the writing sample, make sure if your teachers are struggling a little bit, and I've been in special ed my whole life. I did not come from gen ed. I started in special ed. So sometimes we lose sight of what's going on in gen ed and where, regular ed students are. And so I think it's important for your teachers as they're looking at the needs to understand, okay, this is what my resource student can do. but I wonder what regular ed, gen ed students are doing. And just a very quick example, we had to move into one of the elementary schools when I was in Richland too, and the mother wanted occupational therapy, like, 5 days a week, 6 hours a day. And her son could not write his first name. But I assume that in kindergarten, probably most of the kindergarten kids couldn't write their first name. I guess I kind of thought that was something you taught in kindergarten. I actually went up to the school and the principal, bless her heart, said the answer to that either, but let's check. She tapped into all 4 kindergarten teachers, and we found that pretty much 95% of them could write their own name, full name, first and second name by first and last name by, midway into kindergarten. So that helped me go back and say, yep, this child does need occupational therapy because he was behind. So when in doubt, check with some other teachers. Some other need statements.
Yeah, and again, these are just sentences, that's not clearly not the entire section, but these are just like sentences that I pulled out of some need statements in the present levels. Again, what I'm just trying to emphasize to teachers is it's factual. It's not opinion, it's factual.
And sometimes just giving them samples like this will help them, oh, now I see what I need to be doing. So we share those because as you go out and do training, sharing stuff like this oftentimes is very beneficial.
Yeah.
An example.
And again, here's some knots. And I always laugh because I've got some teachers that can write really, really well. And you're reading it and it sounds just wonderful. And, but then you kind of look at it and you're like, well, wait a minute. Is this really telling me or anybody else anything? So sometimes, we get a little bit of impressed when like I open up an IEP and it's like all this information and present levels. And I'm thinking, great, look, it's more than 4 sentences. And then I read through it and I'm like, okay, this sounds good, but I would have no clue what to teach this child. So watch out for that as well.
Okay, anybody want to share some examples? Do you feel like you have data-driven IEPs, or is that a weakness in your district? Or a weakness with some and not with others? And any comments out there?
Or do you have any strategies to improve present levels?
We're going to have to start calling on people.
I was going to say, unless you muted.
Probably looking
Cindy.
down. Huh?
I said, unless you muted everybody when you were hitting those buttons.
Yeah, I think they can unmute themselves. Anybody want to share anything?
That's the truth. Well, Kathy Griffin threw in there, the reason you get poor present levels is because the assessment wasn't good. And that is very true.
Yes.
You can't, and that's what, I tell teachers all the time, they're like, I don't know what to write, or I don't know what goals to do. And I'm like, well, what are you trying to work with? And usually they tell me they don't have anything. Or the other flip side of that too is I found we can't assume teachers understand the data. And then, if you don't understand something, you can't explain it. So these last few years, we've actually done a lot of training of, okay, you gave these easy CBM assessments, and this is the information you got back. Now, what does it mean? And that was a real eye opener, because if they can't tell you what it means, they can't explain it. Let's see here. We got a few things in chat. Hang on, Cindy.
Okay.
Someone says that oftentimes teachers only report the data and don't explain the skills. Yes, very much so. And that we're going to kind of get into about, hey, that information is great, but what does it look like? So that we're going to talk about that when we get to the impact statement. All right, so keep in mind also that, hang on, I'm sorry, I opened up something and I can't see the slide. There we go. Just keep in mind that we do have to address, we can't have our blinders on and only address the things that pertain to us. I tell teachers all the time, we're not writing IEPs for ourselves. You know, they'll say, well, this is what I teach. So this is what they put on an IEP and this is what the goals are. And I'm like, no, no, no. We don't write IEPs for you. We write IEPs for the student. What you do is what you teach, and that's your lesson plan and that's what you're doing. But your IEP has to be skill specific to the child. And take off your blinders. We've got to look at the big picture. You know, these are other things. And a lot of people forget the functional skills and the transition skills and how functional translates to transition. So don't forget, we need to be looking at organization, study, time management, okay? You know, those things right there, think about, hey, if these are issues in the classroom, these are going to be issues on the job. And I have found a lot too, working with some of our worksite based programs, is, you know, we really focus on getting kids into the workplace and getting them jobs and getting them experiences, but we kind of forget to teach that child what he needs to keep the job. Some of that is organization, time management, communication. So we can't forget the big areas. Okay, so this is the impact statement. And I know that the State Department is changing their evaluation tool for districts, but Richland too was part of one of the was in the last round of the big audit. And, you know, we still have a few scars from it. I still have nightmares from it. They're supposed to be going to a more user-friendly and supportive evaluation tool now. So those of you that are coming up for audit, hopefully you won't have scars from it. But the impact statement, or the third part of the present levels, how does the student's disability affect his or her involvement and progress in the general curriculum? We call this the impact statement. And a lot of times we would have situations where teachers would put in there, Cindy is LD, therefore she needs this or that, or Cindy is LD, therefore she can't read as fast as the other kids. We would have issues in there all the time about the why. We don't want the why, we want the how. We want, what does it look like in the classroom? And this is where the regular ed teachers need to be speaking up as well. You know, if we're in an IEP meeting and a special ed teacher is describing assessments and where the child falls and how the disability, you know, is having an impact here, or this is where the scores are. We need those regular ed teachers to step up and say, yes, this is what it looks like in my class. You know, this is what this group of kids are doing. This is what Cindy's doing. So we want to make sure that we're describing the how the disability impacts, not why it impacts. I think we had a comment there. Let me open that. These are just some samples, again, of impact statements. And if you notice, we have Diana here again. It's specifics. What can she and can she not do in the classroom? And what makes her progress different from those of her regular ed peers? That's what we want to know, okay? And let's not lose sight of our alignment piece. We want this information there because this is another building block in our masterpiece, okay? If we don't know how a disability impacts a child in the general ed setting, then we don't know how to develop appropriate accommodations. So remember, this is more of your alignment, okay? We started with our special factors. We're going through our present levels, so we should all be talking about the same thing. And then as we come out the other end of it, you'll see how it continues to align. Again, these are just samples you can use, or if you have samples of your own, that's fine. But just the point is we need to know what the impact looks like, how it impacts, not just at the fact that it does. And here are just some more examples. Again, you can read over those.
I think I remember back in the olden days,
The olden days.
Where a lot of times in the impact statement, people would just write a sentence or two, and it would be it. And now, you know, and you'd look, and if there were two sentences, there was like, okay, that's good. They're LD, therefore.
All right, so here we go. And again, these are things that, yes, actually came off of an IEP. Reading skills are 4 grades below grade level. He has a learning disability. He needs the support of special services to be successful in his education. Okay.
Yeah, that's just what I was talking about.
Yep. That doesn't tell you what it looks like. All right. And this part too, just a brief little part in here about the parent student input, especially in our audit. We kind of got pointed out to us that this was being left blank. Sure enough, I'd go look and it'd be blank. And anyway, talk to the teachers, why is this blank? Well, the parent didn't come, or the parent came and they didn't say anything. But bottom line is it can't be left blank. You know, if you've got parents who are not participating in the meeting, or students of transition age who are not coming to their meetings like they tend not to do, you know, you can base this information on the IEP from, you know, past conversations. Anything to put in here, maybe you have to elicit things if parents are not participating. You know, you can pull them in, ask specific questions. But the big thing is, if they are non-participants, let your teachers know that this information can reflect previous conversations. And that's just how I have the teachers enter it. Is, you know, they may put in there that, you know, parent stated in a previous meeting or through previous phone calls, these were their concerns or information that they provided to you. So just the takeaway here is it can't be left blank, and you can pull this from other sources of information if the parent or student does not attend the meeting. And again, this is just a sample. All right, so look at some of your present levels. Are they based on fact or opinion? Do you have data that's explained to support your findings? Again, the next building block. So are we starting our IEPs with a masterpiece, or do we already have a mess on the floor?
So what do you think? Do you have a mess on that? We should have done some type of raise your hand. If you have a mess on the floor, raise your hand if you have a masterpiece. Take a minute and look at if you have them in front of you, or if you like to share something that's really good, or share something that you just found and you may want to go out and bang your head against a concrete wall. Moments as a director, and I know Joan has had several. What do your present levels look like? Any comments? Looks like stuff's going in chat, maybe.
Yeah, I think I've seen a few. Yeah, some are masterpiece and some are a mess. You know, it is the mess ones we're kind of trying to improve. And I know y'all are kind of thinking, oh, this is supposed to be a transition thing, but it really, the point of going from it from this angle is they've got to understand that transition is dealt with just like we deal with everything else. It is not separate. And you have to start building your foundation blocks with your transition assessments, just like you do any other assessment. And I found working with teachers that really emphasizing that transition is not treated differently, that I'm seeing better information about that. You know, again, some better than others, but I am seeing that people are at least making the connection.
I think at one point, we may have, as when I was in Richland too, and we were going through IEPs, we would collect samples. You know, you're reading that IEP, and I know Ann said she just looked at 18 of them. You know, if you find one that's really good, do a cut and paste if you can, and kind of start gathering samples that are really, really good, and keep those. Of course, you're going to change the names. And we also, I think Joan and I and several others would sometimes laugh that we were going to write a book on here's what you don't put on an IEP.
Yeah.
I know y'all have been there. I know you have. And I think sometimes seeing that mess on the floor, I think sometimes I had IEPs that didn't even have blocks to play with. So the blocks were missing. But I think when training teachers, and as I've done some,
There's a comment about having partially constructed, and I think that's what I think I have tried to describe as alignment. Is you can't have 2 or 3 pieces here, 2 or 3 pieces there, 2 or 3 pieces in another place, and then in the end have something that makes sense. So when I kind of started the alignment discussion, and I mean, I've like described it with trains. You know, what does your train look like? You know, here's your engine. You know, your engine is your present levels with your findings. What is the next, you know, what is the next car? You know, what is the next car? Okay, whoops, guess what? Your train just derailed. You know, I think if we can give teachers a visual thought process, it helps.
Yeah, and I think your comment about teachers with more significant students having better IEPs, and I think your chat is right. The kids have more needs. They're more attuned to. They've got them all day. I think there's a lot of reasons for that, but I would agree with that statement.
Yeah. Yeah. And the part about people cutting and pasting the same information and findings and into the narrative, we went through that too. Well, it's the same thing. Like, no. It's not the same thing. And that's where using that funnel analogy really helped clean that up. Is no. It is, you're not just repeating the big picture. We get the big picture. And, you know, I remember using the example one time, you know, imagine, you know, you finally made it to summer break and you're so happy to sit on the beach with your novel, got to sit there and read. And you read chapter 1, and then the next chapter is chapter 1, and the next chapter is chapter 1. Okay, you don't want to keep reading the same thing over and over and over. Same thing with an IEP. Okay, you don't need me to tell me the same thing 3 times. I get it. You know, these questions are not asking the same information. They're different questions. Therefore, they should have different answers. So that was kind of an odd phenomenon where they would just cut and paste the same statement 3 or 4 times throughout the IEP. And so taking them back and saying, well, wait a minute, let's look at this question. You put an answer here, but that's not what you were asked. So we did kind of have to find that out a little, you know, the hard way, but You know, sometimes we look at stuff and we think it makes sense, and then we look at the product and we're like, oh, where do we go wrong? All right, so again, we're still on our alignment train here. We went from special factors to present levels. Now we're coming out the other side, and based on the narrative that was synthesized down to our findings, we're going to create our goals. So kind of looking at goals here. And again, everything we're talking about applies to transition. So just emphasizing that the same rules apply helps. Go ahead, Cindy. Oh, Cindy wanted to put this in here there for y'all. Here's your IEP goal. Given one prompt, well, all right, Cindy's having issues. Maybe it's the thunder. Given one prompt with masking tape guidelines as a reference, Shauna will stay in her assigned area. Cindy, would you stop with the buttons? 80% of the time in 4 out of 5 gym sessions by the end of COVID. Cindy liked that one, so we put that in there. There we go. All right, so what is a goal? Okay. Goals describe outcomes of your specialized instruction. Okay. What is the intended outcome or your target? It establishes criteria. How are we going to know if we're making progress toward our outcome? Measures progress in an objective way. You know, it's not subjective where if you don't have the data to back up what you're saying, it's opinion, not fact. And appropriately ambitious and attainable for the student circumstances. Sorry, Cindy. Let me see if I can help Cindy. Cindy muted herself and she can't unmute. Hang on. Because if I can unmute Cindy. Cindy. Boom. Quit hitting buttons, Cindy. All right, Cindy, I cannot unmute.
I think I'm unmuted.
There you are.
Yeah. I accidentally muted myself and I couldn't unmute myself without messing with the top of the screen. So thank you.
You're welcome. Yes, and clearly Cindy and I are not doing any sessions on virtual learning. Okay, so your goal should be appropriately ambitious and attainable for the student circumstances. One thing I have to talk about here a little bit is, you know, typically in your preschool and your school age IEPs, you're talking about the progress you want to make within a year. The same applies to transition IEPs, but there's also the added component of planning a multi-year plan. So really, transition IEPs kind of have 2 aspects of alignment. We talk about, you know, making your IEP align and make sense and be compliant. But we also, with transition, you're thinking ahead, okay? So you're planning a 4-year, 6-year plan for the child to get there. So when we are looking at those multi-year plans, alignment applies as well. So when we talk about appropriately ambitious and attainable, we want to keep our alignment and make sure we're being ambitious and attainable about the same things. Go ahead, Cindy. Y'all have probably all seen these, and these were some things that were pointed out to us in our audit. No specific skills identified as the target of the goal. Again, I can get some very technical sounding goals, but when you read it, there's really nothing identified that you would have any idea what that goal is trying to measure. No measurability. A lot of times I found we couldn't get measurability in a goal because nobody included baseline. And without your baseline, you have no way to determine appropriate, attainable targets. And you have no way to show growth or even know where you're going. So we were missing a lot of baseline. Goals that don't relate to anything noted in the present levels. Again, this was where the alignment train derailed. plenty of IEPs I would go through and think, wow, this sounds good. This looks pretty good. Yeah, this is great. And then I would get to goals and all of a sudden I'd go, where did that come from? You know, behavioral issues or functional issues not mentioned at all in the engine and the next car. And all of a sudden I get to the goals car and there are goals in there that don't relate to anything that I know about. So we shouldn't get to goals and say, do what? Because if you're doing do what and goals, then alignment was lost along the way. And then we always have the famous goals that throw something out there that can't be measured. Cindy and I's favorite one is, you know, will show understanding. Understanding is a hard thing to measure. So when you see things like that, ask yourself or have your teachers ask yourself, how would you measure that? Or what would that look like? So just remember that a lot of times misalignment starts here because you've got findings, but then you have goals that don't relate, or you have missing goals. So, you know, the opposite of the example I gave you is I might have an IEP where the present levels talk all about all these functional problems or all these behavioral issues and how his behavior is impacting, you know, his progress as well as the other kids in the class. And then I get to goals and there's nothing. So that's a little suspect. Not that it isn't possible, but it's not likely. So that's what.
Yeah, I was going to say my one experience was early on when I was director back in the olden days. And I had gotten called to high schools in Richland to, the teacher was under fire. We'd gotten an OCR complaint. Y'all know OCR is not a complaint that you like to get. And it was a 504 situation, but in the 504 plan, similar to goal statements, it was Cindy will understand the directions for doing her algebra problems. And it was a algebra 1 class that the student, he was gen ed. And anyway, he was failing, of course, and they came back and the parent came back and nailed us because the teacher did not take the time to make sure that he understood the directions. And just because she read them aloud in class, it did not constitute understanding. So stay away from that word. It can get you in trouble. The end of that,
Yeah.
we had to pay for a private tutor for next semester in school so that he could pass Algebra 1. And we paid for a tutor when he took Algebra 2. And so that was a lesson learned on how bad goals can get you in a whole lot of trouble. And I'm sure that you all know that. So any comments or questions? Anybody want to share a really funny story to common errors that you've seen or silly goals that you're like, what were they thinking? No?
No, nobody wants to.
Y'all must have had like a really big lunch and everybody's asleep. There's a quiz on this at 4 o'clock. No, seriously. Anybody want to share anything? Crickets.
Crickets. Moving on.
We're going to keep going in about 5 minutes. We'll just take a little break. Actually, do you want to
We
take?
can, well, I'll say, I see too many skills within one goal. Yeah, that's terrifying too, because there's no way to collect data on them. So, yeah, maybe we'll take a break after we get through the goals section.
Okay.
Anyway, with the goals, oh yes, that's a good one. Seen many goals where adult behavior controls the outcome. Yes, I've had people write goals for parents. I've had people write goals for other teachers. And And we're like, would you stop? And that's a good point too, Mary. Goals that are activities and not skills to develop. That's huge when we get ready to talk about transition, because we had to really beat that out of everybody's system. You know, Maxwell research 3 opportunities to use his skills, you know, whatever. And we really had to say, no, that's a one-time activity. Okay, that's not a skill-based thing. And that's really where it trickles back to your transition assessment. And somebody mentioned earlier that one of the big problems with having goals, ineffective goals, is because you don't have the data. Well, that's exactly why we have poor transition goals. And people want to make them activities as opposed to skill-based information. But we'll talk about that when we get to transition. One more city. So anyway, we kind of, you know, I work with teachers about the SMART goal concept that, you know, the State Department talks a lot about. Being specific, measurable, action words, realistic and relevant, and time limited. And that's helpful. But the thing at the bottom is something we came up with years ago. And it was funny because, you know, I would kind of put this in writing about how do you write effective goals and all that, still seeing trouble. I'm like, why aren't people getting this? So I finally made this visual formula. And again, it clicked. I guess people like pictures. But anyway, it clicked. I use this in all my new teacher training, and it just makes sense to them. So it worked out well. So this is kind of a visual schedule, or a visual schedule. Yeah, we all should be on one. Visual formula that people use, and it's helped. So you look at your time frame. Now, probably like on all your IEPs, you probably see by the end of this IEP, but people need to understand that the time frame can change. You know, if it's a high school kid and schedule is different, circumstances are different between first semester and second semester, you might have a first semester goal that's not applicable second semester. So your time frame can change. Even if you're trying to implement maybe a particular behavioral strategy and you're just going to try it for a time, collect data, see where we are, you might have it 9 weeks. Can we steal? Yes, you may steal my visual. And I can send it to you if you can't get it from the PowerPoint. Anyway, use your time frame. Okay, so what is it going to be? And no, it doesn't always have to be by the end of the IEP. Your kid, yes, I've had goals that either referenced 3 different kids or didn't have a kid at all. So we want to make sure we're targeting the right child, you know, the hazards of cut and paste. Direction of change. Typically, any skill that you're going to identify, it's going to be a skill that you want to increase, decrease, or maintain. So that's your direction of change. What are we going to do with this skill? Then identify your skill. What is it we want to increase, decrease, or maintain? Again, that comes from your findings, which is synthesized down from your narrative and your present levels. So your skill, your baseline, which is your beginning, what's your target, and you cannot pick an appropriate target if you don't know where you're starting, and then how you're going to measure it. You know, one example I like to kind of give on the target is, you know, student, you know, is biting, okay? And we want to, of course, decrease the biting. You know, if Cindy is biting me twice a week and I want to reduce that to 0, well, that can probably be attainable. If Cindy is biting me 50 times a week,
which I'm sure you would deserve.
Yeah, I'm sure. 50 times a week, and I set my target to 0, you know, is that really going to be attainable? So, you know, I see all the time people are saying are going to reduce this behavior to 0. Well, if you're starting at 50 times a day, that's not attainable. And that's just an example I use to say, what is an appropriate goal based on your baseline? So keep your baseline in mind. So anyway, but yes, y'all are welcome to use that if you want. Go ahead, Cindy.
I use this with my graduate students when we're teaching IEPs, and I also use it when we're teaching lesson planning, and found that that visual schedule really helps.
All right, so your baseline data, hang on, there's a question down here. Let's see if I can, it's cut off. Regarding the time frame not being an annual goal, whoops, I've had the auditors say it had to be a goal that would be for the year because it's an annual goal. Has anyone else had that statement to them? Not us.
And that's interesting, you know, because you can do goals, and the IEP is a working document that is, you know, you change it if you meet the goals or they're not working. That's an interesting comment.
Mm-hmm. I was just reading that too about once told that dangerous behavior, the goal should be set to 0. I mean, that's certainly where we want to get it. But again, if we're talking about an annual plan that has ambitious but attainable targets.
What was the behavior that was dangerous? Do you remember? I'm afraid to touch any buttons up in chat for fear of muting myself again, but I'm just curious. I mean, I would agree too that,
Right.
you know, obviously biting Joan 50 times, you know, you don't want that to continue. And there are other, you know, there are a lot of different strategies to take care of that, but I'm just curious what the danger is.
Mm-hmm. And again, you know, I mean, if we're having aggressive episodes occasionally, 0 might be an appropriate target. But just kind of just the auditor part in me kind of pops up there that if I'm seeing a goal to reduce a dangerous behavior that's never obtained because the target is too lofty, then I'm going to come back and say, why isn't this child making progress on this goal? And anytime we talk about a child who, you know, doesn't make progress and we're constantly continuing the same goal, you know, I ask a teacher, I say, okay, well, we don't seem to be making a whole lot of progress here. You know, we need to look at 3 things. Number 1, is it an appropriate goal to start with? Is it too lofty for the child to do, you know, to attain? Or is it, do we need to look at our teaching methods or our strategies or our behavioral strategies? You know, it's not always the child. Sometimes we need to look at ourselves. What are we doing? Maybe we need to change what we are doing to affect change on the behavior.
Even the environment. I mean, you'd have to look at the environment.
Yeah.
So it's just
That's
not
interesting. But no, I've never been told that or the thing above about it being annual goals. But you know how it is. Sometimes when there are different audits, we all kind of get told different things. So we'll go from there. Anyway, baseline data, just make sure people, number 1, understand you have to have it. And then number 2, you know, it needs to be helpful. You know, your baseline is really more important than your target, because that's going to tell you where you are and what you need to do. Go ahead, Cindy Lou. This is something else, and maybe y'all have done a better job of explaining it to your people. And if you have suggestions for me, I'm open to it. Especially now where there are so many online assessments and progress monitoring tools. You know, there's AIMSwebs, there's EasyCBM, Lexis. There's all sorts of things out there that districts are using now, and teachers are using that information that gets, you know, generated by these programs. And this is an area where I found too that a lot of times teachers are regurgitating information, but they're not really understanding it to the point that they can explain it. So we went through a rough time there where we had people trying to use percentiles to measure progress. And you really can't do that because your percentiles are based on the kids that also took the test. So it's a moving score, you know, it's not something that you can use that I can use to say, oh, Cindy went from this percentile to that percentile. What you're doing is you're measuring Cindy's ability to take the test. You're not measuring a skill. So we had to work that out of our teachers' vocabularies. Now, we did want them to continue to use it because percentile information is a good comparison tool because you are comparing the child to same age peers who took the same assessment. So if a child comes out in the 60th percentile of something, well, what that means is that child did the same as or better than 60 out of 100 kids that took the assessment. So I find it's actually helpful to use percentiles, but use them to describe. You don't use them to measure progress. You use them to describe. So they're helpful. So I don't want to say don't do it, but you shouldn't see it in a goal. It shouldn't be Cindy will move from this percentile to that percentile, okay? Because a lot of times the data you're basing that on is not skill specific. So we talk about percentages instead. That's what you want to know. You know, it gives the indication of how well the child did, okay? Or how often the desired behavior was achieved out of X number of attempts, okay? So anyway, that was just some confusing terminology that we kind of had to work out of our IEPs. And, you know, I would probably give us a 70 on that right now, 70%, not percentile, 70%, because I still see IEPs measuring percentiles in a goal. So anyway, that's more work for us. We've got to work more of that out. So
I'm concerned about that goal that says Cindy will cross the road 4 out of 5 times.
yeah, I know, we like that one.
Correct.
What happened on the 5th time?
Yeah, roadkill.
Okay,
Okay.
never mind. Okay, so here we go again. So these are again actual samples, which now these are old. I don't think we're this bad anymore. I think we're making a whole lot better. But as you can see, and I did this in training, is have people actually have their goals, have the visual formula in front of them, and say, okay, check it off. Do you have a time frame? Do you have a kid? Do you have the same kid? Do you have a direction to change? What's your skill? Is it a real skill and is it a measurable skill? Okay, great. Well, where's the child right now with that skill? Where do you want them to go? And then how are we going to measure that when we get there? I love the goals that say Cindy will pass Algebra 1 with at least a C. I just don't get it, you know, and I think sometimes, you know, I know teachers struggle sometimes when you have a forceful parent and some things get on IEPs that really shouldn't. So, you know, I'm not saying it's easy, but this was an approach and it seemed to help. So, and then if you look here, we try to look at some, you know, pretty good goals. So, you know, same thing. I will have teachers literally go through these or some of their goals or some samples that I've given them and mark it. Okay, where's your time frame? Okay, where are we going? What are we targeting? So you can use that for that.
Something up in chat just popped in.
Oh, I didn't see it. Did I lose my chat?
Okay.
My chat is empty. Did my chat go away?
It was popping up and I don't know if anybody, okay.
Can you see it?
Holy
You should
cow.
be able to hit a box at the bottom that'll pop the chat box back up for you.
There. Oh no. There we go. Yeah, there we go. The roadkill goal is the same as the dangerous behavioral goal.
Yeah,
Hang on, it popped away. Let me go back.
yeah, that
What
absolutely.
happens when the dangerous behavior isn't set to 0 and the student assaults the staff. True.
Yeah.
Um,
I
I get that, but
yeah,
still, you've got to make that change. Yes, we need to get to 0, but just because you say in a goal it's going to be 0 doesn't mean it's not going to happen.
I
But
think
I get your point. And again, with this training, I'm not telling y'all to do anything different than what your district has guided you to do. Okay. So again, nothing we talk about trumps the directions from your supervisors, but yeah, that seems a little odd.
yeah, on that one about that dangerous behavior, and I don't mind following up.
Oh yeah.
With the State Department. As a matter of fact, they may be on tomorrow in our session. I'm not sure, but I certainly can bring it up and don't mind bringing it up and seeing if I can get a response. I think it's a situation where, yes, if they're assaulting somebody, maybe you do need to have the goal as 0, but at the same time, I think, as Joan said, and we were talking about, that's a case where you have to look at all other factors that go
Mhm.
of your problem.
Yeah.
If they're assaulting somebody or going to assault a staff member, I'm not going to probably worry about what my IEP goal says as much as I'm going to worry about I need to have an emergency IEP meeting and we need to review what's going on in the classroom, all of the behavioral stuff. Is there a behavior management plan? All of those types of things. And then begin to even look at the environment and, do we need to change an environment?
Yeah.
I am not, and most of you know, I am not a fan of what do I want to say, teaching assistants, personal assistants, and even with assaulting, unless you're going to do something, or that assault is kind of an instantaneous thing where even a personal assistant isn't going to help. But there's a lot more going on there.
Right. And also with that too is, remember, goals are just one avenue of addressing a behavior. If we have kids that have, aggressive behavior like that, a goal is not going to be the only thing that's addressing it. The goal might be might be addressing replacement behaviors. What behaviors are we going to increase? The positive behaviors that we're going to increase, which if the child is displaying the positive behaviors, then there's less likely they're, displaying the aggressive behaviors. But the goal is just going to be one avenue of that. And, there probably would be a fib and a bip. There would be strategies. There would be other things too. So kind of like Cindy says, it's not just, oh, we have an aggressive child and the only thing on the IEP that's going to address it is one behavioral goal. So, it's a bigger picture, and goals are just one avenue to addressing anything in your findings. As you remember your alignment, you may start out, but when you get to the part of goals and services and accommodations, things may be dealt with differently. So not everything, in this case, you'd have goals, but, sometimes it might be something that's addressed through accommodations or a different avenue. So then you can kind of go into the next exercise where you have teachers pull out their IEPs and just, do a goal formula test. How are you doing? How is our alignment? Can I trace every goal in my IEP back up to the engine of the IEP? Can I trace it? How did I get to this point in time? And if you can't trace it back, then again, you just have random information and you're adding to the mess on the floor. If you can trace it back all the way and say, oh, okay, that makes perfect sense. I know where this data came from. I know where these findings came from. I understand it because I read the narrative. Then you're doing good. You're adding more blocks to your masterpiece. So Cindy, what time is it? It is
It's
2:20.
2:20. Why don't we take a break and come back at 2:30?
That's fine with me.
Outside stretch, bathroom break, munchie break.
All right. Sounds like a plan. We'll see everybody in 10 minutes.
I've got to go call my husband. I-
Make sure he's not out in the heat.
Make sure he's not in the heat. Well, I told him, I said, now the next 2 afternoons, Jody and I are going to be doing a workshop, and so I can't talk or anything. So he calls me 4 times, and that's when I
Oh,
went mute and couldn't get off mute. I didn't talk to him, as I finally just texted him. I said, I can't talk to you now. I'll be back in just a second. Yeah,
All
hopefully
right. See you in a minute.
not out in the heat.
All right.
Hey, we just took a quick break. Well, yeah, I think you did it first. I think it must have been a bus stop. Yeah, you did it twice, and I was just how we did it. But I could. Okay, okay, bye. That was great. Mike hit the FaceTime twice. I was impressed he knew how to use it.
All right, Cindy, I'm back.
Okay. Let's go ahead and start back.
Hey, Cindy, I will now give you my thunder warning.
Oh, are y'all getting thunder?
Yeah, it just got really dark over here. And I hear thunder, so, but we usually don't lose power, so we're good.
Well, I'm at the university. We don't either, except the day we were taping.
Yeah, I was gonna say, except when you're online.
When I need it. Okay, so let's get started back with classroom accommodations. Our plan is to probably end around 3:45, 3:40, and give y'all a chance for questions. Going,
Questions and share. And one other thing too is if there's something, particular that you think we need to point out to teachers tomorrow, that we've missed, just kind of let us know. All right, classroom accommodations. Again, here is another car on our alignment train. And when we talk back about the impact statement in present levels, this is really your impact statement is your building block for your accommodations, whereas your goals are the skills that you're going to work on to lessen the need for those accommodations. So we do a lot of talk about accommodations in our district because, as Cindy can tell you, and as I've worked with other directors in our district, is a lot of times when we get into muddy waters, many times it's because we're dealing with accommodations that should not have been on the IEP to start with. So we do a lot of work with talking to our teachers about appropriate accommodations and accommodations that are based in fact and data, not opinion. Go ahead, Cindy. There you go. So will your accommodations be your next building block in your wonderful creation? Or again, are you adding to the mess on the floor? All right, so we all know what the intent of accommodations are. You know, everything about special ed is designed to increase access to the gen ed setting. But again, we're dealing with students with disabilities. So what is it that we can do to lessen the impact of the student's disability? And that's where accommodations come in. Remember, they are to even the playing field, not to give undue advantage. Cindy and I often talk about a particular family we have that were adamant that as a classroom accommodation, that their child get to retake a test until she made a B on it. And I think, Cindy, remind me, didn't that actually make it onto the IEP one time? And
I think so.
we had to go back and fix that real quickly.
Mhm.
So anyway, remember that accommodations are things that, you know, they have to, the team is stating that the child needs that accommodation in order to receive FAPE. So sometimes having good data helps you, not sometimes, all the time, it helps you because then you can address the fact of we have no data to support that accommodation if you're getting unreasonable requests. Again, we're talking about your alignment here. Remember that your present levels has to reflect data showing the need for the accommodation. They are based on needs that the child has identified in your findings. Again, you're working to improve the skill that's causing the need for the accommodation. And the last flag, bullet, banner thing about reviewing accommodations annually, this is so important too, because when, you know, things change, students change, circumstances change. What might have been needed as an accommodation, you know, the previous year is not needed in the upcoming year because it might be something that's all the kids do in that age or grade. It might not be anything, it could be something that's being provided in the environment, and it doesn't have to be specifically targeted for that student. So just because something was on an IEP last year does not mean it carries forward to this year, okay? Again, you rely on your data. Do we have an identified need for this? And a lot of that, again, is going to be where you are going to pull in your gen ed teachers to provide input, because your accommodations are going to rely a lot on what the disability impact is in the general ed setting. And what do we need to do to offset that impact while we work on the skills to no longer need the accommodation. Accommodations need parameters. This is a biggie too. If we have an accommodation that has no parameters, then it means all the time, every time. And lots of times I call them explain it boxes. So if you picture Enrich, you have a drop-down box where you pick, you know, the stated accommodation. Below that is the explain it box. And if you don't explain it, about when it should take place, where it should take place, to what extent it should take place, for what situations it should take place. If you don't set the parameters, then it means all the time. And, everybody's favorite, oral testing or oral assessment, do you really mean that for everything the child does, or oral assessments and assignments? Is somebody really going to do every assignment with the child orally? Who knows? Maybe that's what you mean, but probably more often than not, it isn't. They need assistance with lengthy assignments or ones that require a large amount of reading. Do you really need it for a matching assignment or a portion of a test? So who knows? But typically, you need to put parameters on it to say when, where, and how.
I always use the example of my daughter when she was at Blythewood High School, and I guess Blythewood Middle School too. She's an avid reader and does very well, no problems at all. But math, to this day, she has trouble telling time, and also science was impacted by that too. So her accommodation was extended time in science and math only. She did fine in ELA. For the most part, she did fine in social studies. But we limited her accommodations to the specific courses that she had difficulty with. She didn't need extended time in ELA in the English classes. That would have been useless. And she would have liked to have had it as an excuse, but she didn't need it. So you can specify that on IEPs.
Yeah, that's what your explain it box is for. And just some cautionary things here. We never want to add an accommodation solely for the purpose of the child being able to have it for state and district testing. Remember that your accommodations have to be part of the routine instruction. So if it's not something that's being done every day as part of the child's routine instruction, it really shouldn't be on the IEP. So if it is, even if you have a lot of accommodations, the IEP team still needs to determine which of those accommodations carry forward to state and district testing. So it goes from classroom accommodations to testing. It does not go from testing to classroom. Don't provide undue advantage. We talked about that. Needs to be realistically designed. We kind of forget about this, and sometimes, in fact, it wasn't too long ago, I was sitting in an IEP meeting, and the special ed teacher was rattling off all these accommodations. I mean, like pretty much everything that she could think of. And I just watched. There were two regular ed teachers there. There was an ELA teacher and a math science teacher there. And, they were just sitting there with kind of these blissful little smiles on their faces. And I'm thinking, y'all, you have no idea. She's talking about you, and that this is going to be, you're the ones that are going to be doing all this. And they're just like, oh, yes, that sounds wonderful. And on and on and on and on. Well, I couldn't take it anymore. So I finally had to say, now, what's being described here is this and this and this and this. And the more I said, the bigger their eyes got, because it was like, oh crap, what do you mean we have to do all this? And I'm like, right, these are accommodations to the general ed setting. You will be implementing the majority of these accommodations. You'll have the support of a special ed teacher, and some of these accommodations may include the special ed teacher. But these are the accommodations that you will be doing. Well, let me tell you, one of them still sat there in stunned silence. But the other one was like, oh, well, wait a minute. We don't need to do that, because in my class, I do this, this, and this, and this. Okay, boom. We just eliminated the need for that accommodation in her class. And we also do this. And, so once that teacher kind of woke up and got it, we were able to work through a lot of those accommodations to say, yeah, that sounds good, but number one, you really don't have the data to support the student needs it. And B, it's really not needed for this particular setting. So we were able to get it back down to a much more measurable or, workable situation. But this is where you got to pull those regular ed teachers in. So that was helpful when that person woke up. Okay, so now I don't know which one we're going here.
Right here.
Okay,
Yeah.
accommodations, right. So again, this is where you would want to do an exercise again to track your accommodations. Are they appropriate? So think about your accommodation train, okay? So we're back in the accommodation car. The car in front of that are your goals, okay? So can you track your accommodations back to goals and see if, sorry, see if there is a goal addresses the need for that accommodation or is addressing the skill that's making that accommodation necessary. Boom, that's alignment, okay? Now back on through. Do we have data back in your findings to support the goal, which supports the data? I mean, you kind of get the alignment. Think of the thread, okay? Are things lining up on the thread, or are you starting to get things up here, down there, and around? So if you're getting them all over the place, then your alignment's getting a little bit wacky.
Is there a question in chat?
Not that I saw.
Okay.
Okay, so now, here we go. Y'all are all sitting there going, I thought I signed up for a transition session. I did, but all of that was kind of you can't ignore it and just address transitions separately, okay? Everything we've talked about up to this point is inclusive of transition, okay? So now we get into talking about how does transition specifically impact the IEP? Okay, so here's your federal definition of transition, which I'm sure y'all are all familiar with. So we'll leave that there for you to look over.
Just in case you can't spout it out by memory by now.
Yeah, I know, that's what I'm thinking. They're like, we know this, okay? And your transition planning, again, remember we're transitioning from the yearly thought process of where we want to go in a year to the added component of how does this 1 year of planning fit into my 4-year, 6-year plan for this child to move on to post-secondary outcomes. So you're kind of adding, I would say, kind of a parallel alignment here where we're aligning what we're doing with, school age into transition. But then we're also looking at the big picture of transition and how do we jump from where we are now to post-school outcomes. So these are all things, assessment being a big part of it. We're looking at more of the outcome driven and what do we need to do for students for them to be prepared. And maybe that's agency linkage. Maybe that's getting them involved in the community. A big portion of it is pulling the student in to make them more present in their planning and make it more student focused than we have up to this point. Okay, and again, here we go. Your transition requirements, which y'all know, but I put this in here for a specific reason. I'm also the Enrich administrator for Richland 2. And I cannot tell you how many emails I get that say, hey, Joan, I started a school age IEP for this student, but they turned 13 in April and, they're realizing they created the wrong IEP for a child. So I kind of got away from when the child, starting at 13 and backed it up to beginning the school year that a child turns 13. So that way, I'm hoping to get people thinking if they know the kid's 12, then likely they're going to be 13 soon. And is that during the life of this IEP? And if so, even though the kid is 12 right now, you still need to be developing a transition age IEP. So that is our guidance. Might be different for your people. I do know some districts say do a school age one and then do another one when the child turns 13. That's not our take on it. But if it is the school year in which the child turns 13, then go ahead and make that shift between school age and transition. Now, if you are a student, if you are a district that still wants 12-year-olds to have a school age IEP, just remember from, a compliance standpoint that IEP needs to end on the child's 13th birthday. And then a new IEP, transition age IEP, is written from, the day after on forward. So just keep that in mind if you do need to do two, but we try to do the one. All right, so this is where I talk a lot about, your transition information does look and feel different, but we treat it the same. It's still fact. It's still based on your data from your assessments. You still should be looking at skills and what's the baseline of those skills, and then what target do you want to hit. And again, it's measurable. And like everything else, it's aligned. I shouldn't get to transition portions of an IEP and then wonder, where on earth did that come from? Nothing should be a surprise. After I get through special factors and present levels, there should be no surprises from that point forward if your IEPs are aligned. Cindy? There we go. So just kind of, what all IEPs have to have, and then the added components that come with the transition IEP. We're working on the multi-year plan, not working in isolation. We're trying to pull students in to be more student-driven, of course, ability appropriate, as much as they can. And then we're moving beyond just the focus on instruction, academic or functional, and related services, but we're also moving in to include community experiences, employment, career readiness, secondary education, training, adult living needs. So it's the same with add-ons. And guess what? No longer IEP when a child becomes transition age. So what we have here is a new section of the IEP that specifically addresses transition. And this is the post-school consideration section. And for this part, this is where I try to pull in more of enrich to kind of give teachers, the how-to of how to make enrich do what you want it to do in order to reflect your transition. So the post-school consideration section, this incorporates into a normal IEP, it incorporates your transition specific assessments. You get more into students' interest and preferences, the post-secondary goals, which we'll talk about, and then of course your course of study and projected high school outcomes. There we go.
I was
Go
going to
ahead.
say, you want me to take it for a minute?
Yeah.
Okay. So, and we're not going to spend a lot amount of time because you spent the morning with Jennifer. So you're well aware of the need for transition assessment. Once again, when we do this tomorrow afternoon with teachers, it's going to be important to reinforce that they collect the data, but also really spending some time getting on needs, preferences, and interests. As Jennifer was talking today, it took me back to my beginning days as a director and remembering when we would walk down the hall with a student and say, quick, I got to put this on the IEP. Now, tell me what, before we get in this meeting, tell me what it is you want to be when you grow up. And then they just, you had a conversation with, so-and-so, and they want to be a football player. So I think we've moved beyond that by now, I hope, and make sure that the individual's needs and preferences and interests are taken into consideration. As Jennifer said this morning, assessment is not just academic. It's not just focusing on the middle one, education. You have to focus on employment, and you have to focus on independent living. And I know that the federal guidelines, probably the state, and a lot of people think, well, I'm a resource teacher and my students are all getting a high school diploma. Well, if you really want to hear about kids with LD as adults, come visit me, and I will lend you my daughter, who's 30 years old, for about a month, and you tell me if she doesn't need some help with employment and independent living skills. So I really am very supportive of students with learning disabilities, mild disabilities. Those diploma track kids need to be assessed in independent living. They need to be have some career awareness, and think about what they want to be when they grow up. And I mean, we can just think back to ourselves. How many times did we change what we wanted to be when we were in high school to where we are probably now? And I think as we talked this morning with the community of practice, and Jennifer missed, we were talking about the benefit of getting somebody from the university that's a disability specialist to come in and talk. One of the things I see with these students that are coming on, and have self-disclosed, we know they've got a learning disability, but they get to college, and y'all may sit there and say, oh, this is everybody, and it probably is. They don't know how to handle living independently. They don't know how to time manage. They don't know how to do those things. Too often we think about transition assessment, independent living as, well, she can brush her teeth and she can wash her hair and she knows how to get where she's going. But think of all those other independent living skills that we just simply take for granted. And my son, that wasn't even in special ed, when he was at Spring Valley and he graduated, he got a job, moved out on his own, only to find out, 3 months in, that he owed BB&T about $1,200. He had several $40 meals at McDonald's because he'd overdrawn his account. And, his comment to me was, well, they didn't teach me that at Spring Valley. And I was like, Ricky, that's common sense. And then his second statement was, well, you put your card in and money comes out. Yeah, but I know what's in my bank account. So independent living encompasses more than being able to dress yourself and brushing your teeth. And employment, Thursday, we've got a great lineup of speakers with Kim Parker from Clemson, Margot Izzo from Ohio State, Deb Holzberg, all talking about soft skills, communication skills, self-determination, all of those things that will lead into transition assessment for employment, things that we need, skills that we need for employment. So once again, transition assessment for kids with learning disabilities, mild disabilities that we're focused on this week is not just about education.
Yep.
Things to think about. Where is the child presently? Where are they going? Are they going to a four-year college? Are they going to a two-year college? Are they going directly into employment? I believe the State Department shared at a meeting the other day with Task that our post-secondary outcomes was pretty high. And I don't remember data in details, but I know that we had talked about it and seen some data where many of our kids are graduating from your high schools and they're going into some type of post-secondary education, and that's awesome. So how do we get the student there and then think about the types of assessments, many of which Jennifer shared this morning?
Mhm.
Let Joan take Enrich from here.
Yeah, and of course, all the things that we're talking about now, we get indicator 13, indicator 14. And I have found too, explaining to teachers, not that they can do a whole lot more about it, but I think they get a better understanding of, now everybody gets 13, because we've dealt with that long enough. But I found that teachers were surprised about 14. And they're like, really? Y'all get, we get graded on how well kids are doing after they leave us? I'm like, yep, we sure do. And that, we really not just, our primary reason is to do right by students, that we have to prepare them to do something other than go sit on their mother's couch for the next 4 years. We've got to do it, for ourselves too. So we're looking a little bit better, but it isn't just, out of sight, out of mind, the kid's gone, we don't have to worry about it anymore. So I found that was actually a kind of an eye-opener for teachers. Like I said, not that they've got a whole lot of, too much influence on what happens after they leave us, but they do have preparation. They can prepare the child to do more. We all can. And that was just something interesting that many of them had no idea what indicator 14 was. But anyway, picture, enrich. And in this part too, especially if we're doing virtual, or sometimes even if I'm doing, still doing in-person training, I will have teachers log into an enrich, their enrich program, and kind of follow along on this section, so they can actually see where things go in enrich. You notice at the top of the post-school consideration section, there is a link, a hyperlink to the checklist. Just if they're curious, we kind of have another one that we use that is a little easier to follow, but the information is there if they want to reference it. But this is what it starts with. This is where your post consideration part starts with. And of course, like everything else, it starts with assessment. So we have to put the assessment information in here. Make sure people understand the add button, and that you need to be entering your assessments individually. I've had people that tried to lump it all into one thing, and they'll put like 4 in one, one line, and then try to describe it all. So emphasize the add button, that they should be adding their things individually. Now, we recommend in Richland 2, and of course you do whatever it is that you do, but share your simplified indicator 13 with the group. Yes, if I can find it, I will. Pretty sure I know where it is. Yes, I will look for it. We recommend at least 2 age-appropriate transition assessments, at least 1 formal and 1 informal. You may require more than that. We certainly don't hold anybody back. If they want to do more than that, they can do plenty. And again, with us having the luxury of having transition specialists, they will help teachers with a lot of the assessments. And they'll go in also, and because, like Cindy emphasizes, it's not one thing fits all. So we can't tell, all teachers that run support labs use these 2 assessments, because it may not be appropriate for the kid. It's got to be, tailored to the child. So our transition specialist will work with the teachers to say, okay, we can do this, or, this might be a better one. There's one called Esther that I know our transition specialists like to use with our more impaired students. That gives us some good results. So anyway, just make sure your assessments are getting entered individually. And again, the information that we're listing here, I need to read it. It needs to translate into the narrative section of the present level, because that's part of the big picture. we went through a while there where we had people listing the IGP, the individual graduation plan, as a transition assessment. And it's not a form of assessment. Now, the information that was used to create the IGP, that might be based on assessments that people can use, but not the IGP themselves. So we had to work with people about getting that off the IEP and saying, no, you can use the information, but you need to reference the source of the information, not just the IGP. So we say that's informal, honestly, because we don't get too much skill specific stuff on it. Now I do know there's one on, it's running out of my head.
What is it? What did they mention, Joan?
I'm sorry, what?
What's up in,
Cindy?
I'm sorry, SCOAS. Somebody asked if SCOAS was a formal or an informal.
Jennifer?
Yeah, it was me that typed it in because we talked about it this morning, and I wanted to know what Richland said, because I definitely said it was informal, but I want to check, obviously, but I just want
Yeah,
to
we say it's informal because we kind of drop that under an interest inventory.
that's what I thought too.
Goes to a skill-based thing. Now, ONET has a good one. I can't get a lot of people to use it. Now, if the transition people go in and do assessments for the teachers, they'll use it. But
Jennifer used it today. They talked about it this morning.
yeah, it's longer. And if you have students that, don't have the attention to do it, or, don't have the reading ability to do it, you really kind of have to sit side by side and do it. But the thing I like about that one, and I know there are others, some of you all may know the names, that they do it, it looks like an interest inventory, but then it spits out the skills that you need to follow your interest. And so we find that one kind of helpful too. So, but yes, we consider SCOAS, and what's the other one? It's something related to SCOAS. I'm sorry, I can't remember the name of it. Oh, sorry, here's another question. There are two, whoops, I missed that one, sorry. Something about two SCOAS, all right, there are two SCOAS assessments. One is 45 and the other is 80, are both informal. To be honest with you, I don't know enough about the difference in the two to say, but I can just tell you we consider any SCOAS information an interest inventory. So yes. Okay, yeah, and here somebody says both of those are interest inventory, so yes. And there's something else. I'm sorry, it's skipping my mind, but it was something some of our high schools use sometime. They kind of moved it from SCOAS to something else, but it was still pretty much the same thing. All right.
Are we ready to go on?
You might be hearing the thunder behind me. Okay, yeah, go on. All right. Naviance. No, but we have used that one before too. And I would put that down as, again, an interest inventory, even though that gives you kind of more, what's the right way? It has you follow a path, but I would still classify that as an interest inventory. Okay, so just like other IEP information, your information from your transition assessment's got to be in your big picture, your plan. And the goals for transition. Now this is holy cow where we messed up big time. Even though it's transition, it's based on transition information, the rules about goals, kind of still apply when we're talking about annual goals. When we get into the world of transition, of course, they confuse it by throwing more goals at us. But just remember, when you're talking about goals that are identified for transition, again, they're going to be skill specific. It's not going to be a one-time activity. It's not going to be activity oriented. Again, just like everything else, it's got to be based on needs identified. And they have to be steps for supporting the second type of goal, which is the post-secondary goal. And kind of a big revelation to a lot of teachers was it may not be anything different than you're already doing. Your transition goals or the goals already on your IEP may be what's needed for transition as well. So it may not be different than what you're thinking. Okay, we went through a stage there where it was like, in order to improve transition for Cindy to go from high school to be a truck driver, you know, it was so wordy to show we were linking it to transition, kind of got lost in it. But then again, we found out it doesn't have to be a slap you in the face transition goal. It could be something you're already doing. So go ahead, Cindy, we'll talk about more of that. There we go. Whoops. How did we get back to assessment?
Anyway, well, it moved on its own.
You can never talk about assessment too much. That's what it is.
That's
There
right.
we go. There we
Okay,
go.
and so this is one of my very favorite cartoons. It could be when I was adjusting some things, I accidentally bumped it, but I love this cartoon, talking about formal and informal. And no, an aptitude test is not a test of your cell phone apps.
Yeah, I think Cindy reordered things when she was trying to get off of mute.
Yeah.
So what's the
Yeah.
next one there, Cindy?
Okay, so let's move on to interests and preferences.
Okay.
Once again,
Go ahead, one more.
one more. Okay.
Yeah.
I had to add this cartoon.
Uh-huh.
Only because, yeah, Jones and another, yeah. With interest
Okay.
and preferences, you know, once again, we talked about SCOAS, but I had to put a cartoon in there.
I got you.
Just, you know, so many of our students want to be in professional ball or whatever. And I can remember my son wanting to be a video gamer.
Oh, yeah.
You remember that, Joan?
Mhm, I do.
Yeah, my husband looks at me and said, "Isn't that your career, Cindy?" Anyway, I like that cartoon.
That's a good one.
Okay, is this where you'd like to be?
No, go back to that other one. We'll just kind of hit that. Back to the student interest and preference.
Okay.
I want to point out too is, you know, of course we want to have student information reflected. You know, kids got to have an opinion. They have to have buy-in to all of this. So when we ask people to write student interest and preferences, we want to include both. We want to include what the students' input is, but also, you know, some of the information that we can get from interest inventories can be used in that section too. And it works nicely when your informal assessments or even some of your formal assessments align with what the student wants to do in their post-secondary goal. But sometimes, like Cindy was saying, when we get people that are kind of like really off of it, where what they want to do may not be consistent with what their findings show. And that can be kind of a teachable moment in that situation where, you know, Cindy has her heart set on this, but yet through the assessment, you could show the students, hey, this is where your interest lies, but let's look, this is where your aptitudes and your strengths are. And kind of use it as a teachable moment to say, you may want to do this, but this is where you may run into difficulty. Or, you know, this might be your area of interest, but as we move forward with your area of interest, you know, maybe we want to consider these areas too, because this is where you have a lot of positive skills in that area. So
Ready?
like both when you can. Yeah, we'll jump ahead. Okay. So one thing to explain to teachers also is that post-secondary goals are different from measurable annual goals. I almost kind of wish the powers that be had maybe named that post-secondary statement or something. But I just know naming them both goals kind of threw a wrench in people's thinking. With post-secondary goals, make sure you emphasize that it is targeting an outcome that will occur after the student leaves high school. Whereas annual goals measure the progress that the student is making while in school. Your post-secondary goals are specific to the transition areas of education, training, employment, and when appropriate, independent living. And like Cindy said, let's not just discount independent living for higher functioning skills. I have 2 sons as well, and sometimes I just shake my head and think, oh my gosh, you know, where did they miss that? And not that we have to teach everything to everybody, but that's why we have to look at that functional part and the independent part through assessment. So we know if this is something we really need to provide some help with. And then back to the alignment train, we also have to make sure that we have annual goals that are specific to skills or specific to deficits that might impede the post-secondary goal. So our annual goals should be steps to reaching the post-secondary goal for the student. So the biggest difference between your post-secondary goals and your annual goals is outcome versus progress. Cindy? There we go. Okay, now again, I'm speaking from experience in the old world of you know, a pretty stringent audit. And I know a lot of us got zapped by the wording of our post-secondary goals. And, you know, I hope that if, you know, we kind of get away from particulars and more into substance, but just for the time being, until things do change, just make sure that your post-secondary statements indicate what the child will do after graduating or exiting, not what plans, hopes, wishes, or wants to do. Those kind of got tagged in an audit. They need to be very simple will statements. Will do, will pursue, wants to, hopes, or statements. Those will have difficulty passing an Indicator 13 audit. So we don't have to overthink this section. This is where simplicity benefits you. You just want to make it a clear boom statement. And you want to think of it as yes or no. A year from now, can I look at that post-secondary goal and say, yes, Cindy became a truck driver, or no, she did not become a truck driver? So think about it in terms of yes or no, okay? So as simple as John will attend a 2-year technical school to become a welder. Boom. In a year, can we say, did that happen? Did he go to tech school? Did he become a welder? Yes. That's as that's as hard as a post-secondary goal needs to get. So this is again just another sample student that I used in training how to Scout do with these type things. And Scout is on an employability course study. She has a mild intellectual disability. She's not on diploma track. And she's receiving experience in a retail setting, and that's what she wants to do. Okay, so these are where you start with your post-secondary statements or goals. In Rich, you start with your education and training goal. And again, it's just a simple whatever. Now, I can remember when transition really got to be a big thing, and teachers did not want to fill these in because they would say, well, I can't make sure that happens. I can't be responsible for what happens afterwards. So that was a lot of talking it through, saying, no, 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 no. You're not being held responsible for that part. You know, this is so you can frame the 4-6 year plan. Okay, if this stays consistent and this is what she wants to do, what are we doing now in 8th grade, 9th grade, 10th grade, 12th grade, you know, +1, +2? What are we doing to give Scout the tools to get there? And that's, so I explained, this is more for your planning than it is a compliance thing, or are you getting it done? So there's your simple will statement for that. Same thing with career and employment. You know, you want to avoid your mays, your mights, your wants, and your ors. That was pointed out to us that we couldn't use an or statement, that we needed to use our transition assessments and our transition findings to help Scout determine where is more of her aptitude going, to be an animal control officer or to be a machine technician. So a lot of these are guiding goals. And then the third one, of course, is the independent living. And it always says when appropriate. But what Cindy was talking about earlier, we don't want to just discount independent living for students that, you know, don't have significant cognitive delays. There could be real issues with, you know, what is things that are going to impede these students becoming productive citizens, adults. You know, can they budget? Do they know about taxes? And again, you'll find this information out through your assessments. You know, if students are worried about, you know, budgeting, but they have like serious math problems, okay? Could be we've got to up those math skills, so we're addressing these independent living skills. Cindy? Okay, so let's kind of look at some of these annual goals. Well, as far as using work in the field of computers as being too vague. Hang on, I'm trying to read the rest of this comment. Yes, I remember getting zapped for vagueness too. And, you know, we had to put some things in there like get a little more specific, like working in the retail setting. No, retail setting wasn't that big of an issue. But I do remember back that because I said, like, for example, your computer field, that there are so many parts to the computer field. Are we talking about programming? Are we talking about repair? Are we talking about this type things? Now, I don't want to say people were getting too picky, but yes, do be careful about vagueness. And I do remember the computer thing being cited for that. Retail, I think we were okay on that because I know some of the other parts of the IEP. Now remember too, we're looking at things in isolation. So when you're looking at the big picture, then we're also talking about, okay, what were we looking, you know, the student interest and preferences, you know, she really wanted to be a cashier. Actually, she wanted two things, but we had to settle on one. Cashier, or she really wanted to do displays and I don't know, the marketing part of it. And so you can narrow it down too. Cindy, I think we're jumping a little bit here with the annual goals. So we're back to the annual goal part. And this is about the your goals cannot be one-time activities. Okay. And I think both of these got zapped off of an IEP. By the end of the IEP, Max will use career inventories and interest assessments to identify minimum 3 realistic options, and then do a report, a portfolio, a job description. Okay, that's an assignment. That's not an identified skill weakness that we are trying to increase, decrease, or maintain. So that's an activity. That is an assignment. Okay. Another thing with the one below that, again, is this a goal that one can be measured, or is this a situation that is, if we provide this as an opportunity for the child, is this something where they go to work on their skills that we are targeting in annual goals? So again, you want it to be too broad. Don't not be too broad. But again, you don't want to focus on your events or your one-time activities. Okay, so the participation or completion in something shouldn't be the goal. It should be the skills. Your post-secondary versus your annual goals. Again, they're different, but they are related. For each of your post-secondary goals, there should be annual goals that move the student towards achieving the post-secondary goal. And when teams are developing annual goals, they should be asking themselves, okay, great, we're doing this one now because we have on our transition lens, what goal is this supporting? Okay, what are we moving? Why are we working on this skill, and how is this going to support the post-secondary goals that have been identified? All right, so we're talking about measurable annual goals for transition. Now remember, we're back in our annual goal lens, and these are the skill-specific goals. Again, these might already be on your IEP. You know, if you have a student who is going off into post-secondary education or post-secondary training, likely, or even, you know, the military, likely they are going to have a high school diploma to move towards whatever that goal is, so that the goals that are working the child towards achieving the high school diploma may already be on the IEP. That's the first step in their post-secondary journey, okay? So in order for me to go to a college to become a computer programmer, well, the first step in my journey is getting out of high school. And my IEP should be supporting the skill deficits that I have that are impeding my progress towards that first step. So it could be that your goals are already on your IEP and they are not something separate. And that's easy. You just tell people to, hey, hit 2 check boxes, okay? Because that makes this written expression goal that Cindy needs help with. Yes, it's an instructional goal and it's something you're working on, but this is also something that we need to accomplish so this doesn't impede her progress towards her post-secondary goals.
And slide is just in here to make sure that you remember to address education and training and career and employment.
Yep, those are the 3 areas. Okay, so we're back to the part of the post-secondary outcomes section, the post-secondary consideration section. And this is where we talk about transition services that are needed to assist the students. There are several areas that are in your drop down that we identify: of course, instruction, your community experience, your related services, your employment activities, daily living skills, and functional vocational evaluation. I'll be interested to know y'all's input on that last one, because that's not something we choose very often. I don't know why, but we don't, but I think it's something in our minds that we were thinking is something separate than what we do through our regular assessments. So we avoid that one. But the next slide kind of explains what all of those are. again, your community experience, it's not just activities. It's not just taking your whole class to Goodwill, for exposure and for community service type thing. It's not that. Your community experience is something that's going to be taking a student to a specific setting in order to apply the skills being taught at school. Okay, so these are going to, your transition services are going to relate back. Yeah, I see somebody popped up there with the schema part. I can let Cindy talk about that. I think we all kind of have our opinions of that. But I'm not going to relay my opinions. I'll let Cindy do that.
Cindy,
Let me get to the end of this slide and then Cindy
Yeah.
about schema. Your
Okay.
services. Now, when we're talking about this, with the related services part, you're considering what the student is receiving in school, but you also have to keep in mind that are there related services that the child is needing now in school that will need to be continued through agencies after they leave high school. So that's something you want to keep in mind. That's probably not something you would address on an 8th grade or 9th grade IEP, but as we move up, getting closer to the student exiting, then that section would probably kind of take on that flavor a little bit, where we would be kind of handing off the mantle from school to agency-based assistance. Employment activities, again, we just don't want these to be random. We want them to be focused. Same with the acquisition of daily living skills. What is it that we need to provide students where they can be prepared and trained in activities that adults do every day? Okay, so that's kind of what those are on there.
Do I have to talk about schema now?
If you want to.
I don't want to. Schema came about with the credential students as part of the credential. And originally, supposedly, it was a formal assessment. And I think on the portfolio, it's still listed there. We've kind of gone round and round with that because it is a checklist. To me, it's more of an informal assessment. There rules from formal assessments, and it doesn't meet it. And it's a good thing.
Yeah. And I think Kathy was just saying that she was just throwing that out there as an example because she agrees, like, when would you ever use that last one? Which is kind of I feel too, which is why we don't even.
I think Kathy agrees with your opinion of schema. I think that's exactly what she was saying.
It's like, you know what, I can't really think of any example of where you would encourage people to check that. Okay.
No, I wouldn't either. And we've kind of all been like that. It came out of the credential group. And I, like I said, for a checklist of some type, but we tend to not talk a lot about it.
There you go. All right.
My face when Joan said, Cindy, we'll let you talk about the schema. And I was like, there's no more chocolate in my desk drawer. Okay, we'll just move on.
So we can move on.
Yeah, we'll move
on.
It might be another question up there.
Let me go back to chat. Chat, isn't a functional vocational assessment a tool that some outside agencies use? Yes.
Yes.
And that was kind of the other thing too, is why we discouraged people from doing that or checking that. And we did get back in the days of our audit, we did have, and I guess it was because really nobody really understood what it was. So we didn't have great training on it, but we would have teachers checking that because they were considering the in-class assessments and informal and formal assessments that they were doing. They thought, oh yeah, well, I did a functional assessment, and boom, they would click it. And so then we got into, okay, well, that's not a functional vocational assessment, and we were like, ugh. So anyway, so we had to correct a lot of IEPs to take that off of there. And then, yes, we did find out later that that is something that you can, at least through Voc Rehab is who we were,
Yeah. Yeah.
um,
That
we
was-
could, you know, arrange with them to have it done. But even they were kind of, yes, we do it with certain students, but not others, because they have their criteria for use as well. So yeah, we stay away from that.
I don't know if there's any districts out there that do it. My understanding was it was something that we requested from Voc Rehab.
Yeah.
And I think and Joan, you may remember when Ivory was our transition coordinator at Spring Valley, and she was part Voc Rehab, and or Voc Rehab paid part of her salary to, you know, make
Right.
a collaborative effort. And there was some discussion if VR came in and did an evaluation while the child was in school, could we check that? But I think over the years, I don't ever hear anybody checking it, that it just is
Right.
on there.
No, I think we all
Yeah.
got gun shy and just started
Yeah.
staying away from it
Yeah.
personally. Okay, so then the next part of your transition IEP under the post-school consideration sections, we get into age of majority. I didn't want to talk a whole lot about this. I just wanted to mainly say, hey, you got to remind people to do it. And because, you know, it does involve transition age kids. And so my training when it comes to age of majority is, hey, don't forget to do it. It's pretty self-explanatory. And, you know, within Enrich now, as long as you're checking the right box, Enrich will provide you the required documents that you need to complete and give to the parents and the student. So that's why I just put that on there, because that is the next progression of the post-secondary consideration section. Okay, now this next part, honestly, we just left that in there just for FYI to you, is this was just another tool that I found helped with talking to teachers. And you know, I think we all had the days where our teachers of our most significantly impaired kids, or, you know, severe kids, and even moderate teachers, I mean, they kind of discounted, oh, well, transition doesn't apply to us because our kids are never going to go to work. And then honestly, I had it the other way around too, where I had resource teachers saying, oh, no, our kids are fine. They're going to graduate and go on to college. I don't have to deal with transition. So I really kind of had to work with people about what does transition look like for the students you teach. So this was just something that I kind of said, look, you need to frame your mind around kids and how we look at kids and what, you know, we anticipate outcomes are going to be. So I just kind of had people kind of think of them as, okay, think of your kids that are going to graduate from high school and go on to something else. Think about your kids who may or may not leave with a high school diploma. But whatever they're going to do, doesn't matter. I got my diploma, I'm going to work. I didn't get my diploma, I'm leaving and going to work. Okay. So those kids, you know, look at them a little bit differently. Then we have, you know, our kids who are going to probably be leaving high school as our 21 exiters, you know, the kids that are aging out. And what do we have to consider in their transition planning? No, it's not going to be the same as a child that leaves with a high school diploma and goes off to college. Okay, it's not going to be the same. So just getting people to put the right lens on for students that they're working with. So these next few slides are just kind of ways that I broke it down so everybody would feel like, oh yeah, transition does apply to me. So you can kind of see through here. Talk about your diploma bound students. And again, most of it is how you're reflecting the information on the IEP. I think the next one is, your kids, whether they're leaving with or without a high school diploma, or now, maybe they're on the credential track and they are going to leave and they are going to be, productive adults, or they're going to be adults. What can we do to help them be productive adults? But again, anything that we do on this, it's not just random, and we're not just going to throw it on the IEP because we got to the end of the IEP and went, whoops, I forgot to address transition. Let me stick it here. That totally messes up your alignment thread. Okay, you can't just throw something on the end of an IEP because you forgot it. You got to go back and start at the beginning and weave it in to the IEP. And then I think the third group, just, again, your focus might be different, for our kids that are, leaving at 21 and they require more, functional or independent assistance. It's going to look different. So just kind of framing it that way helped those teachers that thought transition didn't apply to them and the students that they taught. So, these are just, if it's helpful to you, use it. If it's not, do away with it.
So as we wind down these last couple slides, and my little screen sharing thing is a cartoon, but it says, congratulations, Larry. Again, this year you have achieved all of your IEP goals. And Larry says, of course, thank you. And he leaves the high school and then said, I'm sorry, goes to apply for a job, said, I'm sorry, you're not prepared for a real job. And Larry says, how can that be? I achieved all of my IEP goals. And so, we need to make sure that school and the real world, don't always see success the same way. So it's real important. This cartoon to me lends itself to transition, that it's real important while these kids are in school that we make them or help them as much as humanly possible to be successful, and make sure that their goals are appropriate. Make sure that you
Cindy, let me throw in one comment with that. What you just said also is, I have found that if we get the kids to realize what we're doing or encouraging them to do or trying to help them do is a means to get to where they want to be, you have a whole lot more buy-in if they can see the end result and that end result is relevant to them. I think where we lose kids is where we do it for them and think for them and predict for them. And the more we can get them to buy in, to say, we get this is where you want to go, but this is how you're going to get there. And this is what you need to do to get there. It helps a whole lot more with the buy-in and with, the shift with IEPs being adult-driven to being student-driven.
I want to share a very quick example. And my husband's an engineer. He's retired now, but he's always great to say, isn't this like kind of your area of expertise? But and this was another one where I thought about, it's just like, okay, I may dump you out of my car right now. But anyway, we had a mattress delivered for our camper, our fifth wheel, the other day. And the fifth wheel has a king size mattress, and we just needed a queen for more room, and it was not the most comfortable. So we went to Mattress Firm, and it was delivered out of Columbia in a rental truck. And we live on a farm, and they came barreling down our driveway, which is a lengthy driveway that Joan and I originally named Grasshopper Way. for a particular reason. And anyway, you remember that, don't you, Joan?
Oh, yeah.
Darn big grasshoppers flying over my car. Anyway, they didn't make the turn, so they took out a chunk of my front yard.
I
And
know.
when they pulled up in the truck, there were three guys and they were laughing and basically acting like fools. And very, very, very unprofessional. Never really introduced themselves. For all I knew, they were three guys that were coming to rob me. Never introduced themselves, or I mean, just very poor service. So they left, and I complained to Mattress Firm the next day, mainly because the front of my yard had been dug up by the truck. And Saturday, the guy that owns the company, the rental company in Columbia, called me and said to me, he's a very nice guy, that he literally was taking kids out of McDonald's and training them to be delivery. And he was offering them, you know, a hefty salary, far above what they were making at McDonald's. And he talked about the kids having the skills, not having the skills coming out of high school, ending up at McDonald's. And he really wanted to do something. He had given them all blue t-shirts with the company's name. They didn't have those t-shirts on. And he said, what do you mean they didn't have blue t-shirts? And I was like, well, one had yellow, one had gray. I don't know what the third one had. But anyway, and I thanked him for calling. I really appreciated that. But I also thought about what he said a lot, that here he is taking these kids and trying to make them into productive adults. And I almost wanted to say, wonder what high school they graduated from. But he was trying so hard to carry on probably where we as the school districts had left off. And the driver of the truck had been suspended, which was good. And I think he was going to pull the other two young men in and have a chit chat with them, because I said, don't fire them, take them and teach them those skills so that they can continue to deliver, and maybe put a mentor driver with them to help them. So anyway, it was a good transition lesson. And after they actually delivered and we walked back in the house, my husband said, there's another fine example of your great job doing transition, or something like that. He laughed. But anyway, there's a lot of skills out there that we need to teach for kids to be ready for a job. Make sure you have all your ducks in the row. You are able to use, I should have said puzzle pieces, or blocks in a row, but use these slides for your benefit and adjust them however you need to. You're certainly welcome to do that. You can use the pictures and the cartoons as well if you want, but please use what we have. It was made for you. The teachers will have pretty much the same version tomorrow. And I think there's over 400 people registered for Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. We know that doesn't always translate into 400 and some people showing up, but virtually, but you never know. So we hope so. And final thought, don't forget about the characteristics of transition IEPs. We did not go over indicator 13. Hopefully you know that ad nauseum by now and recite it in your sleep at night, but it is attached to the task website and documents that we have. Plus you can just Google indicator 13. And finally, it's important to remember that with IEPs that one size does not fit all. Joan and I can probably tell you war stories from our Richland 2 days. We're in a resource room out of 33 kids, 32 of them had the exact same IEP. So, or close, okay, maybe 25.
Well, and that was because the teacher wrote the IEP to fit her because
Yeah.
of what she taught. Well, I teach this, therefore it's a goal for everybody else. So
Yeah. Yep. So it's as you do the IEPs, and I can't remember if we ever had issues on the audit with one or two getting gigged for this, but sometimes you did see it on transition goals. Everybody had that same transition goal. Some of you will remember where Jen and Cindy will complete a portfolio complete a PowerPoint presentation of 6 slides talking about what they want to be when they grow up. And you know, we know that's an activity now, not a goal, but everybody in the classroom, everybody on the resource load or the teacher's caseload would have that. So it's important to individualize based on the needs of your kids. And at this point, now we got a little bit of time, so I have to tell you about the slide. Do you like it, Joan?
I think the point of taking the slide out was so nobody knew about it. So it kind of defeats the purpose if you turn around and tell them about it.
Well, I have to tell them about it.
Cindy.
I was trying to find a question mark that was colorful and cute and just not your basic black question mark up there. And so I was working on my laptop one evening